Bueno, look what we got here. A Cuban Trump supporter. Well, aren't you getting what you deserve? Trump's deporting all the Cubans. And you voted for him. Dios mío, yo no puedo. De esto es Mari sin censura. Vamos para allá. Alright, so the New York Times this weekend published an article that you guys keep sending me, and I had to do a video on this because it's just the encapsulation of rage bait news cycle that we have succumbed to as a society, that all of our news is just trying to get us to click on the most outrageous things, so they make the craziest headlines, right? So they exaggerate everything, they make everything a rage bait. So why? So they can get profitability in their shitty ass newspapers that are already dying to begin with. You can tell that I'm on fire today. Estoy en candela with this article. Let me put it up on the screen. To their shock, to our shock, Cubans in Florida are being deported in record numbers. Now, this article right here was written by Patricia Mazzi. She's the chief of the Miami bureau of the New York Times. And what this really is, and I read the entire article, what this really is she wrote it because, of course, Cubans tend to historically be Republican. And that was not an exception in the 2024 election, when Cubans and all Latinos in Florida came out in record numbers for President Trump. So that article really was to rage bait the Cubans, to say, well, look what you voted for. You voted for a president that is now deporting Cubans. Now, a lot of the TikTok idiots will go on TikTok and saying that this is what Cubans voted for. However, you have to be a US citizen in order to vote, so you can't get deported as a US citizen. I don't know if they touch grass yet. However, I want to give you guys some non-rage bait pieces of information that you guys can take and you can discern on your own. So what this article does not say is that between 2021 and 2025, the Biden administration, Cuba experienced record numbers of migration exodus. The biggest exodus, the biggest immigration wave in Cuba's history so far since, of course, the 1959 revolution. He stole, piece of shit Castro that he was. And so this between those 4 years, and really 2022 to 2024 were the really big years, over 1 million Cubans left the island. That is 10% of the population in Cuba. 10%. And of those 1 million people, 800,000 Cubans came to the United States. 800,000. I want you guys to understand how big that is. That is bigger than the primary exodus in 1959 to 1970, which was we call that the golden years, the golden exile generation, where over 400,000 Cubans left during that period. And that was a period of nearly 10 years. That's bigger than the Marielitos. Marielitos were about 100,000 Cubans that left during the Mariel boat lift. And then another 100,000 to 200,000 estimate around there of the balseros. Of course, many of those balseros, the people who went, famously went through rafts through the Florida Straits, many of those people, unfortunately, did not make it to the United States, but those are the rough estimates. This, if you combine all of the exoduses in the past, this is bigger than all of that combined. That's how many Cubans left the island in the past 4 years alone, thanks to Biden administration for roughly having an open border at the time. Now, Patricia did not mention the roughly 800,000 Cubans that entered the United States between those 4 times. She didn't mention that. She went straight to the point and said that he has repatriated more than 1,600 Cubans. Mi amor. 800,000. Let's do the math. I'm getting my calculator out right here. 1,600 divided by 800,000, because Lord knows I can't do this math. 800,000. 1,600 divided by 800,000. Okay, you guys, I gotta tell Yoel when we get here, lock the doors, close the blinds. We ain't going anywhere until 2028. No, actually, January 20th, 2029, we ain't going anywhere. We are hunkering down in this house because the Trump administration is getting us. They are getting us because you know how many people that is? 0.002. 0.002 of Cubans. I mean, Dios mío, qué miedo. What massive numbers, Patricia. Massive. And of those 1,600, remember, the Trump administration has not yet, and I will say that about Trump. Trump, release the numbers. Don't release just the Epstein files. Release the ICE numbers, okay? Of those 1,600s, we really have no idea how many had past criminal records, how many already had deportation notices issued to them, because yes, some Cubans have had it and have never never complied with their notices of deportation. We don't know how many of those people were actually already in the process of getting deported, has had criminal records, or came here with fraud. Because if you don't remember, what Patricia doesn't also say in her reporting, because of course the New York Times, we gotta rage bait people. We gotta just say the most hyperbolic bullshit. In 2023, Cuban fraud. Let me bring this up for you guys on the screen. Okay, so this is a report from the Department of Homeland Security, and they said that they identified fraud risk in parole processes for non-citizens. Okay, so what this really means is in 2023, the Biden administration created something called the humanitarian parole, and people could apply for the humanitarian parole instead of going through the southern border, which I thought at the time would be a really great mitigation of the southern border. We get to vet people and then they come in. Well, there were so many people applying for this humanitarian parole, and of course, the government is ineffective and it doesn't do anything right, that they just massively approved these humanitarian paroles. And then they later found out that over 11,000 visas for these humanitarian parole visas were all being sponsored by the same 100 people. Now, I'm laughing because that is typical Cuban fraud. Like, of course, somebody made a business out of this. Of course, in Miami, they made a business of you paying somebody, right? They'll do all the paperwork and they will sponsor your person in Cuba for the humanitarian parole. Of course, that person has to show that they have the financial means, that they have the capital to bring this person over to the United States. However, they use the same 100 people for 11,000 visas. 11,000 of them, okay? So when we talk about that 1,600 number, we don't know who of those 1,600 were criminals, like I said, had orders of deportation already, or people found a fraud. People found a fraud entering in this country. Now, do I blame the immigrants from Cuba for this fraud? No, I blame them, los huevones, the idiots in Miami who made a profit off of this immigration scam and loophole that they found that they could get a bunch of money doing this for. However, that was what Patricia leaves behind in this New York Times article. So of course, the headline is crafted in a way to provoke people. It's crafted in a way to say, wow, well, look at the Cubans now. They voted for Trump and they're getting deported. Yet she doesn't show that the record numbers of people entering the country were significantly high. That's why there's obviously going to be more deportation. And given that 1,600 people, mijita, 1,600 people in 1 year, that's 4 people a day. 4 people a day. 4. that are getting deported. So, of course, this was an article really in order to stroke those rage bait clicks. And of course, people ate it the fuck up because they all sent it to me. Look, mira, mijita, mira what Trump is doing. Now, there is this other theory that I find really interesting. I haven't really massaged it yet, but I do find it interesting. And that is that, yes, we should be deporting Cubans, or we should be stopping the flow of migrants from Cuba to the United States. Not because we don't want them here, not because we don't think we have, humanitarian reasons to have them here. It's because it will ultimately fuck the Cuban government. Now, why I say that is because this is a 3D chess movement here. Is because the Cuban government has long known, okay? If it's anything that dictatorships do well, is that they are the same party in power for so long that they can be effective in some of their offenses and defenses when it comes to foreign policy. And so we know, right, that the Cuban government has long had a policy of making Cubans into migrants, because the backbone of the Cuban economy really is the Cuban migration and the money that they send back to Cuba, right? We know this. They have known and they have crafted this as a response to wet foot, dry foot, as a response to all the benefits that Cubans have had in immigration in the United States. And they said, well, if they're going to do that, we're going to do something else. And America really hasn't caught on to that, I don't think. Maybe the people in the CIA, the FBI, the people in the White House, I don't know, send it to them. But this is really a 3D chess move. The Cuban government has long known about these immigration benefits, and they respond accordingly. They say, oh, well, if the US is going to do that, we're going to play ball too. So let's make Cubans into migrants. Let's send them off to the United States so that they can bring back money into Cuba. And then that's how we can sustain this piece of shit economy that we have, this piece of shit socialism that we have. If Cubans cannot go back to Cuba to give money to the Cuban government, if they can't migrate out of Cuba, well, maybe they're going to have to do something about Cuba. And maybe that's what Marco Rubio is planning. Maybe this is his 3D chessboard, saying, hey, okay, Cuban government, you want to play that way? We're not going to make Cubans into migrants anymore. Now, that's just a theory, and I find it interesting. Not necessarily that I think it's the best policy or the best theory, but I do think it is one, and it's interesting to massage that. But this article right here, this disgusting article that you see right here, is only put there so that Cubans feel afraid, so that immigrants feel afraid, so to paint this administration as they're rounding all of us up, when that is further from the truth. Further from the truth. And I really, really hate when the media does this for an obvious purpose, is to save their dying publications, their dying commentary, and they rage bait you into it so they can profit from your fear. I had to get that one out. So many of you guys asked me for it. So many of you guys asked me about it. I had to get it out. Estoy en candela hoy. Oh, cojones, New York Times. Patricia Matzi, do better. Dale.